The moment I stepped outside that morning, my heart sank. My fence was gone, cut down as if it had never existed. And standing where it should have been was Karen. Smiling like she'd won some twisted victory. She claimed it was just for access. But I knew this wasn't about convenience. It was about control, about showing me who really ran the street. Every neighbor seemed to look the other way, and suddenly my quiet life felt like a battlefield. I wanted to fight back, but how do you battle someone who thinks rules don't apply to them? And then, I realized there was a way to turn the tables. One that would shock everyone, including her. Would I take it, or let her win? Before the chaos, life in our quiet suburban street felt almost perfect. Mornings began with the smell of coffee, drifting across freshly mowed lawns, kids riding bikes in the cul-de-sac, and neighbors waving as they jogged past. My house, modest but warm, had always been a sanctuary. A place where weekends were spent gardening. Barbecues filled the backyard with laughter, and even the occasional HOA newsletter was a minor nuisance at best. But beneath the calm, there were small, creeping tensions I barely noticed. A neighbor who lingered too long near the property lines, hushed complaints about paint colors and fence heights, and subtle power plays masked as community rules. I never thought these quiet annoyances would escalate into something personal. Something that could shake the very foundation of my home. But I should have known. Something was brewing just under the surface, and soon, my peaceful life would collide with a level of entitlement and manipulation I couldn't have imagined. Almost overnight, my quiet suburban life began to unravel. It started with small, irritating letters slipped under the door. Warnings from the HOA about things I'd barely noticed, like the exact shade of mulch in my garden or the angle of my mailbox, but the tone was never polite, always accusatory. Then came the fines. First small, then escalating, each one a shock, each one a reminder that every inch of my property was under surveillance. My neighbor Karen seemed to take particular pleasure in these disputes. She would stroll past my yard, always at the exact time she knew I'd be outside, pausing just long enough to remind me of rules I'd never agreed to, or making comments about my neglect in front of passers-by. One afternoon, I discovered she had removed a small section of my hedge bordering our properties, claiming it blocked her view, and she did it without asking. I tried talking to the HOA, hoping reason would prevail, but they dismissed my concerns with vague references to community standards and neighborly responsibility. Every conversation felt like a trap. I'd ask a question, and they'd twist my words, threatening fines or legal action. Then came the inspections, daily visits from an HOA committee member who measured, documented, and critiqued every detail of my yard, often comparing it unfavorably to Karen's perfectly curated property. My mailbox was flagged as non-compliant, my garden as overgrown, and even the positioning of my patio furniture came under scrutiny. Each incident chipped away at my sense of security, leaving me frustrated, exhausted, and increasingly desperate. I began keeping a log of every interaction, taking photos, and recording times, trying to protect myself from what felt like an unrelenting campaign of intimidation. The tension reached a new level the day Karen casually walked into my backyard, ostensibly to check the fence, and clipped a corner of it with pruning shears. She claimed it was to prevent encroachment, but everyone could see it was deliberate, a bold and audacious provocation. I felt a surge of disbelief, anger, and a sense that no one, no neighbor, no HOA, was going to enforce any fairness. As I stood there, staring at the mutilated fence, the thought hit me, maybe the only way to regain control was to think bigger, to fight not with apologies or petty complaints, but with a move that Karen and the HOA couldn't ignore. The idea was audacious, even risky. But the more I considered it, the more it seemed like the only path left. Little did I know, the events that followed would not just challenge my patience, but completely upend the balance of power in our neighborhood, leaving everyone stunned. And just when I thought the tension had peaked, the next incident landed like a punch to the gut. A notice of an auction, listing a plot of land, including, potentially, the very corner Karen had used to trespass. My mind raced. Could I actually turn this madness into an opportunity for justice, or was I stepping into a trap I wouldn't be able to escape? The day of the auction arrived with a strange mix of dread and anticipation, each second crawling as if the universe itself was holding its breath. I stood at the edge of the courthouse lawn, heart hammering, clutching the auction packet that detailed every lot up for bid, including the very strip of land Karen had crossed without permission so many times. The crowd murmured, a mixture of curious onlookers, real estate hopefuls, and a few familiar neighbors who had long watched the petty feud unfold from their lawns. When the lot number was called, Karen appeared, impeccably dressed, smug, and clearly confident that she would outbid anyone who dared challenge her. The auctioneer's hammer rose, and the tension thickened, every increment of the bidding feeling like a direct challenge to the quiet tyranny she had enforced over our street. I forced my hands steady, adrenaline slicing through every trace of fear, and began my bid. With each back and forth, her smirk faltered, then snapped into disbelief, then frustration, and finally, fury. The numbers climbed, and the room's energy shifted. People were watching not just an auction, but a reckoning, a rare public spectacle, where the powerful neighbor could be challenged in full view. My pulse pounded as the final bid approached the limit I had set for myself, the possibility of failure shimmering like a dark cloud over the edges of my focus. And then it happened. Karen hesitated, faltered, and refused to counter. The hammer came down. The strip of land, the physical piece of ground that had been the flashpoint of years of intimidation and petty harassment, was mine. Relief, triumph, and disbelief crashed over me all at once, but it was mingled with the surreal awareness that nothing would ever be the same. Karen's face went pale, her carefully constructed aura of control shattered in a single, irrevocable moment, and for the first time, I felt the weight of power shift entirely. This was not just about land. It was about standing up, about reclaiming dignity and asserting that no neighbor or HOA edict could override the basic respect for one's property. As I walked away from the courthouse, deed in hand, I knew the real challenge was just beginning. Integrating this victory into everyday life, dealing with the inevitable gossip, and watching the ripples of this confrontation cascade through the street. But for now, that hammer strike echoed louder than any threat, any fine, or any petty comment ever could, and I realized one undeniable truth. Sometimes the only way to win is to play a game the other person refuses to understand. And as I glanced back toward where Karen stood, stunned and silent, I couldn't help but wonder. How long would it take for the next move in this suburban chess game to unfold? In the days and weeks following the auction, life on our street shifted in ways that were both subtle and striking. The strip of land I had won became more than a physical boundary. It was a symbol, a tangible assertion that entitlement and intimidation could be challenged, and that fairness didn't have to be sacrificed to neighborly politics. Karen, once the self-proclaimed arbiter of our little community, moved with caution, her confident strolls replaced by furtive glances and whispered conversations with other neighbors, as if the sudden reversal had reminded everyone that power could be temporary. The HOA, too, seemed to recalibrate. Inspections became less intrusive, complaints less pointed, and the unspoken message was clear: boundaries, both literal and figurative, mattered. Meanwhile, my own life returned to a sense of normalcy. I had feared lost forever, yet with a heightened awareness of vigilance. I installed subtle markers, documented every interaction, and maintained the landscaping with pride, not because of fear of fines, but because reclaiming control had given me a renewed sense of ownership over my space and my peace of mind. Neighbors who had watched the feud unfold began to approach differently. Some with respect, some with cautious curiosity. But the tone of the street had changed irreversibly. The incident became a story people told in passing, a cautionary tale of entitlement confronted with patience, strategy, and resolve, and it served as a reminder that even small, everyday injustices need not go unchallenged. On a personal level, I found an unexpected clarity. The ordeal had revealed the strength in measured action, the power of documenting truth, and the satisfaction of asserting one's rights without stooping to pettiness. Reflecting on the experience, I realized that winning the auction was never truly about revenge. It was about restoring balance, about drawing a line that could not be crossed again, about teaching that respect, even in a tightly controlled community, could not be assumed, it had to be earned. And as I stood at the edge of my yard, looking at the fence, the land, and the quiet streetscape, I couldn't help but ask myself, and anyone who might ever face a similar challenge, what would you do if someone crossed your boundaries and no one else intervened? Because sometimes, the most important victory isn't just the one you see. It's the one you feel, the one that restores your sense of dignity, and the one that changes the rules of the game forever.